Okay, hello everyone. I'm Matthew. I'm the co-founder at Fountain, and we are building a decentralized exchange for security tokens. And if we say security tokens, we really mean like real-world assets that are brought on-chain as tokens and deemed securities. So equity in a company or short-term loans or whatever. Now, these tokens, like security tokens, it's been a while since we talk about them. So I just like to pose you a question, namely, I mean, when was the first time that you heard about security tokens or tokenized securities? I mean, how long since you know this idea of tokenization? And for me, it's quite a while. So I remember like the last bull run, 17, 18, when we heard about the tokenization of everything, right? We have all these nice assets out there in the world. We bring them on chain and make them even better versions of themselves. And like the idea was really the tokenization of everything, but already there we had a focus on different types of assets, namely art and collectibles, real estate, and venture capital, and other types of equity people were focusing on, mostly like mid-cap equity. And what we saw back then is a lot of fundraising, like various of these projects, you know, they raised 20, 50 more millions to launch their projects, and a lot of hype and a lot of very high expectations. And so what I want to do in this presentation is take a look at what has happened in the last 3 years and where is this ecosystem at the moment, because I think it's not that easy to derive from the news you read and really gauge this. And then tell you a little bit about our view at Fountain, why we think, like, what were the biggest hurdles, how far have we come in these different dimensions, and what gaps are like still open for this ecosystem to really thrive. Okay, now before we get started with that, let's maybe just quickly remember why we even started with the whole tokenization and what we think are the promises of tokenized equity. So first of all, it's liquidity, right? Everybody wants liquidity. And why do we think that we get it here? It's because transferring tokens is a lot cheaper than transferring shares. You disintermediate a bunch of guys. And also because of the second point, accessibility. So you have more tokens and more people that can buy and sell them. So hopefully more liquidity. Second point, accessibility. Is mostly, you can look at this in different dimensions, right? The most well-known is probably fractionalization. So you have very high value assets. If you fractionalize them, more people can get access to them. But you can also think, so that's basically like size of asset, the dimension. Another dimension would be time. So we're used to trading 24/7 in crypto. The rest of the world isn't. And with tokenized equities, we want to achieve something similar. And then, because the costs of issuance, like over the whole life cycle of an equity, also ownership and transfer decreases, you can have more types of assets that can become tokenized. So your asset doesn't need to be as big and as wealthy to be tokenized. And people can hold and transfer smaller quantities of these assets because ownership and transfer costs less. And so that's all basically accessibility. And then the last point was essentially transparency. So if you have your share registry on chain, obviously everybody's at all times aware of who owns which types of shares. You can see when transfer happens, when large trades are made, etc. And it's actually interesting, like in the real world, especially for smaller companies, that is actually a problem, that this share registry is up to date. I mean, I couldn't believe this, but it happens. Okay, so that's why we started with all of that. Now, what has happened since now in the last 3 years? So a lot of announcements. Company X tokenizes 100 million of real estate. Company Y tokenizes 10 million of SME loans, etc. So that's one data point. And the other data point is just a lot of money flowing into that. So I talked already about like the ICO craze, where we have these, 20, 50, whatever million raises for platforms in that area. But actually that has continued all the way through now. And just last month, Securitize a platform for tokenization in the States. They raised 48 million, led by Morgan Stanley. So the institutions are coming and they're pushing money into that. But beyond the money and the announcements, I cannot see that much, to be honest. So if you think of these three aspects that I talked about before, namely liquidity, accessibility, and transparency. So if you say you want to have tokenized assets, which are all of these three things, not many actually are left. So at Fountain, over the last 2 months, we have been in very close contact with all the large issuers in Europe, or most of them, hopefully. If someone is here and has an asset for me, please come and talk. And what we found is that, yes, the assets that could be listed at this point in time are very few and far in between. So the question is, why? And if you then find out why, well, has there been other progress, and where are we standing in this ecosystem? So I think that's really what's interesting for you out there. So I'd like to tackle this along 3 dimensions. So first, regulatory, then infrastructure, and the application ecosystem. So first, let's look at what were the big hurdles like 3 years ago when all these projects started. And essentially, it's still the same things that are necessary to, to have for a thriving ecosystem at the moment. And then in the next step, I would like to look at, okay, how much progress have we made along these 3 dimensions up to now? And what are the gaps that are still open that we need to solve to really create a thriving tokenized security ecosystem? Okay. So it's a lot of text, just so you can like take a photograph. It's basically all our intel gathered, and we are happy to share, obviously. But I will guide you through that. Okay, regulation. I mean, it's pretty boring, but it's super important for all things security tokens, right? What do we need? The most important thing is regulation and legal certainty around tokenization, right? So in the very beginning, you created a token, and then maybe you trusted some guy that this token represents a share in whatnot, and that was like as good as it got. You created a bunch of contracts around this, but it was really not very certain. And so that was like the first big hurdles. Like no institution is buying a token if they are not 100,000% sure what it actually represents in the real world. Okay. Big problem. Then the next thing, KYC, AML. I mean, you all know this. It's also a problem in other areas of crypto, but for securities especially, because well, there is regulation that some companies, they need to know who their shareholders are, etc. So it becomes even more important. Then licenses. So there is a whole regulatory framework existing, right? And you have licenses for custody of securities or for the trading of securities, etc. But really, like the requirements of regulators and the technical capabilities of blockchain, there is just a mismatch. So if you talk to a regulator about a trading venue, so that's the legal slang for exchange, I mean, they think of who is holding custody, where is the broker, who is operating this exchange or trading venue, where is the CSD, so like the Central Security Depository. These are all things like from the old world I didn't even know about, right? And we don't really need them anymore with blockchain, but these people, they don't understand that. And so you need to educate them, and they need to create laws, and that takes time. And it's really hard to comply with the old laws that require all these things when there is just no CSD or no broker, right? So that's a big problem. And then I'm being pretty vague with all things regulatory. Why? Because it's a global world, right? In the US, it looks very different than in Europe, than in Asia. And even within Europe, right, you have the EU that tries to regulate, but is like super slow. Then you have the individual member states. They also regulate. Some of them are faster, some of them are slower. And so you're left with like this, maze that you need to navigate if you work in this space. And it's pretty complex and changing all the time, right? Usually if you have regulation, it stays there forever or like a decent amount of time. And here, like, you have nothing, and then half a year later, something is there, and you need to adjust. Okay, so that's all things legal. or the most important things, I would say. So infrastructure, that's probably more well known. It's similar around the whole sphere. So we needed, like 3 years ago, again, like when all of this started, well, wallets, on-ramp, custody, AML, on-chain ID, blah, blah, blah. It's similar for all these apps that we built. Then what's more specific to securities is the need for stablecoin, right? I mean, if you have an asset denominated, whatever, in euro or in dollars, and you have some payouts that happen on a regular basis, and you want to draw a loan on that, you really want to do that in that same currency. And then you need tokenization providers, like service providers. 3 years ago, everybody who wanted to get tokenized did this themselves, thought themselves about what types of contract they have to write and how to do this. I mean, just a lot of replication of everything. And also token standards, everybody created their own token standards, which is not really helpful. And then the last point is the application ecosystem. So if you finally bring something on chain, I mean, what do you do with it, right? We wanted this liquidity, we wanted the transparency and more. And well, for liquidity already, like trading is really difficult without trading infrastructure. Transparency maybe you get by just looking at the blockchain, but yeah, like ideally you would have these lending protocols, the trading venues, liquidity mining, etc., also working for securities. And like back then, DeFi wasn't even a thing, so it's out of the question that we could do that. Okay, so now let's look at the progress that we have made in these dimensions. So first, regulatory, big progress. So now we have laws in different countries in Europe, for example, Liechtenstein and Switzerland, where the regulator says, okay, you can issue a share on chain, ma'am. So you don't even need to do any strange contract to say that this token represents whatever in reality. It's just a share, bam, done. Okay. And I mean, these countries have proven that you can do it and other countries will follow. And then the second thing, special crypto regulations, that has also happened to a certain part. In Germany, we have the BaFin crypto custody license. In Switzerland, as of August 1st, we will have special licenses for trading venues that trade security tokens only. So they can, for example, directly approach retail customers. They can do their own custody. So it's very advanced. So that's the positive side. Problems are still like across Europe, you know, there's no unified approach. Passporting is difficult. Then also clear regulation of just adjacent activities. Like the issuance is more or less clear by now, but trading and especially how you integrate decentralized infrastructure in all of this is still super unclear. And it's just a case-by-case question. And also, I mean, even simple things like the applicability of KYC, right? So by now, for everybody, it's clear. If you issue a new security, okay, you got to do KYC. And then even in Switzerland, with like very advanced regulation, you see different players doing different things afterwards. Some just transfer the tokens without KYC and say, you know, that's fine. And others have a whitelist, and at every single sale, a person needs to be KYC'd and everything stored on chain. And you ask like reputed law firms, and you get two different opinions with the same facts, same legal system, everything the same thing. So it's just very unsure. For us as a startup, you know, we can go one or the other way, that's fine, but you won't have a big institution coming doing business with you if that's like the certainty of the legal status. Okay. Infrastructure. A lot to celebrate. I mean, all the great wallets, all the DEXs, and I see somebody with a Uniswap shirt. So, on-chain analysis to compete with AML, like stablecoins. Well, we have them for USD. So a lot of stuff happened, right? And we also have professional and regulated issuance platforms by now. I mean, we have companies with banking licenses in Europe that do the issuance of tokenized securities. So this is like the grade of seniority or seriosity that you need if you want to deal with institutions. So that's there. And regarding the token standards, we still have many, but they look so much alike that for our exchange, we were able to basically integrate them all. So I would argue like we have more or less a standard. And so for all interested, it's essentially like ERC20 plus whitelisting for the KYC reasons. Yeah. Now, the biggest problem I still see is a great on-chain ID, and we've also been talking about that for about 5 years or so, and it's still really missing, and that makes it hard to make these different tokens interoperable. And you don't want your user to do KYC 10 times with 10 different providers. So at the moment, it's a hurdle. Stable coins in other currencies. So we are dealing mostly in Europe. That's our focus. And you need people, with euro or Swiss franc or pound stable coins. And there are trials, but it's not liquid. That's basically how it is at the moment. And then, the integration with like legacy systems. So what a lot of people forget is like if you have a company and you have shares, then you tokenize them, then they are like on an island. If you want to pay a dividend, if you want to communicate with your shareholders, like you have all this IT stack that is used to integrate with whatever, some kind of software in the real world, and you need to bridge the tokenized world into all these different softwares so that everything still works. So that's something that's missing. Okay, now regarding DeFi and the application ecosystem, what can you do with stuff like with tokenized securities that are on chain? At the moment, not that much. I mean, we have DeFi, but all these tokens cannot interact really well with DeFi. So Uniswap you cannot really use for a token with a whitelist. And there's more problems because pooling, you shouldn't do that with securities, etc. But you see first protocols like Maker, for example, integrating securities as collateral, so you have short-term loans that are integrated there. But also they are not like really on-chain, they are not tradable on-chain, they are not liquid. So it's like we are getting there, but it's some intermediate status, I would say. And so the whole power of DeFi is not yet accessible to assets, tokens. Okay, and that's what we are doing. So in that area, Fountain is helping. So we've built a DEX for security tokens. We focus on like making things as easy as you can, on-chain trading. It's open, so no admin key, nothing. Anybody could use the protocol with all of these security token standards we are aware of. And it's true peer-to-peer and non-custodial. And that's very, very important because like this, we can actually be compliant. So we are not regulated, but we presented the case to the authorities which are responsible for us, and they told us that we don't need to get regulated. So it is compliant, and that's super important. And nobody would deal with you like from the real world again if you're not regulated, or like can make a case why you don't need to be regulated. Now, I mean, I wanted to do a demo, but it's getting tight. So anybody that's interested should just reach out, and I'm happy to do this. I mean, this is like a design slide, and that's now just screenshots from the actual app. I think it looks very much alike. You can trade and create orders and cancel orders, etc. I mean, just the usual stuff for an exchange. But it works with security tokens. So the status that we are at, it's deployed, it's tested, it's audited by Chain Security. We are onboarding our first 2 customers at the moment in a private beta. And we'd hope that somewhere towards the end of the year, we are actually able to bring this live for the public as well. Yes. So just to summarize a little bit, what have I found out about the space or the last months? So essentially, I would say, even though we've been talking about this for a long time, it's still really early times. But under the hood, like you don't have all these assets that are on chain and being traded, but a lot of progress has been made in these 3 dimensions, right? That's not something that you as an end user directly see, and only if you like go really deep down into the rabbit hole, you even are aware of these changes and what they mean. And recently, first assets have been brought on chain, and they actually see traction, right? At Maker with Centrifuge, I mean, people buy these assets, they invest in them, and Maker is using them as collateral. Or also the asset tokens that FTX, etc., are trading. Well, Binance has stopped now, so again, regulation is important. But people, the end users, are interested in dealing with it. And I think that's really important to see that, because this validation wasn't really there for a long time. And how I see this is, as we close more and more of these gaps that I outlined before, we put ourselves in a better position to really try out and experiment quickly and find like these growth flywheels that we really need to make this space actually usable. And I mean, just remember 1 year ago, that's how the TVL looked like of DeFi, right? And we know all how it exploded like this in a year. And essentially, to get there, you need to be able to have this infrastructure and to be able to try out a lot of things and see where the users basically bite on. And we're getting there. Okay, thanks. Hey. Sure. Are you involved with the project? My name is Mathieu Chanson. I'm the Sorry.